This arose out of a talk I was asked to give at the GAFCON conference in Jerusalem in 2018 on cultural Marxism, the challenge of cultural Marxism. And this, I believe, is the most important book I've written, because what has actually happened in Western society is a revolution. And effectively, the dominant way, the prominent way in which most people, even if they're not aware of it, are looking at society, the way in which they're interpreting things, is not through, if you like, the traditional Judeo-Christian lens, which our Western civilization is founded, but essentially a Marxist lens. And that is basically to see everything in terms of conflict, in terms of the oppressor, the victim. And so whatever you're thinking about, this is something which has come through academia and dominates academia, especially the social sciences, then everything is perceived in this particular way. And so it's not surprising that we're seeing this accentuated at the moment in the United States, and is focused on, at the moment, with obviously the presidential elections, but also here in Britain. And so if we're going to understand where our culture is, and if we're going to, as Christians, going to engage with that culture to demonstrate there's a better way, then we need to really appreciate cultural Marxism, that this is the dominant way in which most people are viewing things.
Well, like you, Melvin, I was a school teacher. I didn't have this in my teacher training, but several of my friends said their course was pure Marxism, and that was in the 80s.
Yes.
And I guess that you said that it's spread through the social sciences.
Yes.
But it's really quite shocking for many people to hear what you're saying about the people seeing the issues of the day through the prism of Marxism. How has that happened?
Well, this is really a large part of the book explains how this has happened. But it's important to grasp the idea, which was developed by an Italian communist. He was the founder of the Italian Communist Party in 1922, Antonio Gramsci. Now, he and many of the Marxists at the time were trying to wrestle with the question of, well, how come the revolution has not happened? And also how it happened, obviously, in Russia, although that surprised them because, according to Marx, it was really through an industrial society. That is where the revolution would occur. The proletariat would rise and kick out the bourgeoisie. But it happened in Russia, so that was a bit strange. Why didn't it happen in Germany? Why didn't it happen in Britain? Marx, of course, wrote Das Kapital here in Britain. And then the second question was, well, how can we bring Marxism to the West? How can we capture the West? Now, Gramsci made a distinction between what he called the war of maneuver and the war of position. Now, the war of maneuver is the traditional understanding of revolution. You know, you man the barricade, you attack the palace, whatever it is, and you bring it down. You bring Parliament down. You bring government down. But Gramsci said, no, before you get to the war of maneuver, you've got to think about the war of position. You've got to get people in good positions to prepare the way for the takeover. And so he developed this idea of what he called the cultural hegemony. The word hegemony comes from a Greek word, which means ruler. And he argued that basically the way in which a society can be captured is through non-coercive means. He argued that society tends to be dominated by an elite, and these elites occupy what he called cultural forming institutions. Education, you mentioned that, but also the media, marketing, and also fundamentally the church was very, very important. So he argued that what we've got to do is effectively to get people into these positions, and so that then people through education, through marketing, and so on, people start to see things again through the Marxist lens. But things have moved on. So instead of it just being the traditional class struggle between the workers and the capitalists, things moved on to say, well, no, what we've got to do is to draw together all the different minority groups, the radical minority groups, into, if you like, into a coalition, not necessarily a formal coalition. And so you bring together the disaffected, whether it's in terms of feminist issues, ecological issues, race issues. And the narrative, the basic narrative, is that by definition, a capitalist society is oppressive, it's racist, it's misogynist, it's patriarchal. That's the narrative we've got to get out there. And basically, that's the narrative which people, even of the right, have bought into. And that is why you find people, even in the Tory party, whether they realise it or not, espousing what is essentially neo-Marxism.